What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm doing a card discussion on Magical Midbreaker Field. Now, this is a card that actually got rather overlooked by the TCG, but actually sees a lot of play in the OCG, especially for one of the strongest decks that we currently have played here in the TCG, and so that's why I wanted to talk about this card today. It's rather unique in what it does, and it has some rather cool applications. But before I get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest patrons. As always, it's been a while since we showed the patrons some love. So big shouts today to Joshua, to Rick, to Joe, as well as Johnny. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me in the channel through Patreon, or consider becoming a YouTube channel member, then hit the join button down below, or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So, Magical Midbreaker Field is a field spell that has an effect that reads as follows. Activate this card at the start of your main phase 1 or 2. During each player's main phase 1, monsters on the field cannot be destroyed by their opponent's card effects. Also, neither player can target monsters their opponent controls. You cannot activate or set field spell cards. So, there's a lot to kind of break down there, and one of the biggest applications for this card is the fact that this is essentially a card to allow you to go off with doing your combos without them being interrupted. Now, there's another card that we can kind of compare this to, and that's Called by the Grave, because in both instances of Magical Midbreaker Field and Called by the Grave, the biggest thing you have to worry about when you're going first with a combo-based deck is hand traps, because obviously your opponent's not going to have any other cards set, so you have to worry about what's in their hand. Now, both of these cards do a good job at effectively stopping different types of hand traps. Called by the Grave can stop any hand trap that has to discard itself to the graveyard as cost, and that's a majority of them. However, there are a few cards that Called by the Grave cannot stop, most notably Infinite Impermanence and Psy-Frame Gear Gamma. Now, here's where Magical Midbreaker Field comes in, because this card will stop both Infinite Impermanence and Psy-Frame Gear Gamma to an extent, because if Magical Midbreaker Field is active, you can just go off with your combos. Your opponent won't be able to drop Infinite Impermanence because it does target. That's one of the Achilles heels of Infinite Impermanence as a whole, and you're free to just go off, extra link your opponent, do whatever combo your deck is meant to do, and Magical Midbreaker is going to help you get there where Called by the Grave would not. Another example is Gamma. Now, Gamma's a little bit weird because although the effect of the monster will still be negated by Gamma, Gamma will not destroy the monster since Midbreaker Field will protect it from being destroyed. Now, is that necessarily relevant? It kind of depends, because if the effect that gets negated, Gamma's most likely probably served its purpose. However, not having the monster destroyed is actually a very big deal, because if it's a Link 2 or a Link 3 monster, you can just link off with it and keep going and extending your combos into higher links above the chain, and that's a really strong advantage of playing a card like Midfield Breaker, because yeah, obviously it's a really big deal having that effect getting negated, but losing the monster entirely is kind of just like, throwing salt in the wound, right? But still having that monster, being able to link with it, to synchro with it, to exceed with it, like doing whatever you possibly can with it, that's what Midbreaker Field is made for. Now, Midbreaker Field's also good because it stops a couple of other hand traps that overlap with a card like Called by the Grave as well. It'll stop a card like Effect Veiler, which doesn't see too much play, but some people opt to play because they want that extra effect negation, and Effect Veiler does target. It also stops Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Now, this is a really big one because Ghost Ogre will be destroying cards, and having that protection from Midbreaker Field is a very valuable asset. Now, Ghost Ogre can still hit stuff like field spells and maybe continuous spell or trap cards, so it's a bit of a bummer that it doesn't protect all your cards, but having the protection for your monsters, maybe for like your Firewall Dragon, so that you can keep continuing on with those combos, I think that's very vital. Now, there are some other applications for Midbreaker Field as well, because let's say you go second. Well, obviously you might think Midbreaker Field might not have as much application, but on the contrary, there's actually a lot you can do with Midbreaker Field going second, because it pretty much stops your opponent from using all of their disruptive tools that they might use to pretty much prevent you from turning the game back around in your favor. So for instance, if you're going up against a Sky Striker player and they have Widow Anchor, well, since Widow Anchor targets, Midbreaker Field won't allow them to use the Widow Anchor, and that's going to put you in a very good position. What about if you're you're going against Altergeist and they have a Sulquidius on the field, well, Sulquidius also targets, which means they won't be able to bounce monsters back to your hand. Same thing goes for a card like Solemn Strike. Again, kind of like Gamma, where it'll negate the effect, but Midbreaker Field will protect the monster from being destroyed, which means you can still use it as whether link material or whatever you feel is the most optimal use of that monster in that instance. You can also use it against True Draco. You know, Draco is still a pretty solid tier 2 deck at the moment, and having protection from the True Draco trap cards getting tributed off and potentially popping your monsters is a very good source of protection that Midbreaker Field provides. Beyond that though, Midbreaker Field's pretty cool because even if you're going first, and let's say you establish your board, it has uses during your opponent's turn as well, because notice how Midbreaker Field applies during both players' main phase 1. So this means that they can't use any of their cards that would target or destroy their opponent's monsters, which in this case are yours, just at all. And that's so powerful because look at cards like Mind Control, that targets, you know, a board wipe like Regeki or Dark Hole or like Kaiju Slumber. There's cards like the Nightmares, which both target and destroy in some instances. I mean, there's a lot of really good application. And yeah, sure, one of the weaknesses of Midbreaker Field is that they could just go to main phase 2 and do all of these things, but having them waste not only their main phase 1 and their battle phase just to get to main phase 2 so that they can target your monsters or destroy your monsters with card effects, I mean, you are getting some value there that pretty much ensures that you're not going to die that turn, so I'd say that's a pretty strong advantage. Now, I did mention the weaknesses of Midbreaker Field, and I feel it's very important to go over those as well because there are a lot of weaknesses that this card has. So first off, one of the biggest weaknesses of Magical Midbreaker Field is the fact that it doesn't stop some of the more prominent hand traps that are being played. Like, it doesn't stop Ash Blossom, it doesn't stop Winter Cherries, it doesn't stop Ghost Bell, doesn't stop Droll and Lockbird because none of these cards target. Now, obviously it's a bit format specific, or depending on what you're trying to do or protect your deck from, that's where you're going to make the decision as to whether or not you see Midbreaker Field being worth it. But in terms of overall like representation of these hand traps, Ghost Ogre and Effect Veiler aren't seeing too much play at the current moment, but that could change depending on, you know, a ban list or if the meta shifts or anything like that, so it's something to keep an eye on. You also have to realize that Infinite Impermanence is probably one of the most played hand traps at the moment, and a lot of people have been opting for Gamma because it's an interesting way to counteract Goki, and Goki is kind of where this card is really good because it's a combo deck that's just trying to go off, have as many outs as possible to pretty much any sort of hand trap or disruption so that they can extra link you, so just keep that in mind. Another thing too is that it's only good in main phase 1, so like I said earlier, if you just go to main phase 2, you can now immediately target and destroy your opponent's cards, and that applies to both players, so definitely keep that in mind. But the final thing that is kind of a really big downside when it comes to Midbreaker Field is the fact that it has to be the first card you play during your turn. So that means you can't use Terraforming to search it, because if Terraforming is the first card you play, you can no longer activate Midbreaker Field. You can't use any other field spells in conjunction with this, because if you do, I mean, you're just going to be locked out from using them because it has the clause saying you cannot activate or set field spells. So it's very, very conditional in that sense, where you need to have it in your opening hand, you can't search it, and if you draw it a bit later on, it might be one of those cards that's a bit of a dead draw, because maybe you're in a position where you've already extra linked them and you don't need the card, or you're losing and you're going to be in a position where Midbreaker Field is not going to be an ideal card to help you come back, because it's not necessarily like a combo piece, it's kind of a card that shields the rest of your combo from being able to work. And while those cards do have value, you're taking away from the fact that you could have been playing another card to help extend your plays or give you the ability to keep going. So that's just something to keep in mind, but overall, I think the card's highly underrated. I think we've started to see some players opting to play it in the side deck. A couple players have been opting to play it in the main deck, and it's a really solid card all around. If you're playing a combo-based strategy and you're looking for a way to out cards like Impermanence, Ogre, Veiler, and Gamma, like I said, to an extent, this is a really solid option, but do keep in mind it does have a lot of downsides. It's kind of like a dead card in some instances. I think side decking it's actually not a bad idea, because then you know when you're going first, you're going to want to side the card in, and then if you're going second, you know, there's probably other cards that are better for that particular instance. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about Magical Midbreaker Field. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider backing me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by pledging any amount and supporting the channel, you're contributing to my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.